This is a free webinar series that's jointly organized by us here at Tempra in partnership with the Social Pedagogy Professional Association, as well as the Social Pedagogy Association. So there are two associations. One is based in the UK, one is based formally in the US, and we're working collaboratively on promoting social pedagogy and finding out how is the whole pandemic and the experience of lockdown shifting our understandings of different social pedagogical concepts, because we recognize that social pedagogy theory needs to be closely linked to practice. So we want to make sure that the theory reflects practice as well as informs and guides practice. So that's why we thought it'd be good to have a webinar series. So today we'll be talking about the 3 Ps and how we can develop authentic relationships, particularly during the challenges that lockdown has brought. So I'm very happy to be joined by my colleague Charlotte Fiering, who lives in Denmark and knows all about the Common Third, by Alicia Cabot-Pasqua from Coventry Council, by Kat Barton from Community Circles, by Cecile Remy from St. Christopher's Fellowship, and by Ali Gardner from Head, Heart, Hands in Practice. We will be starting off with Charlotte and a short introduction to the 3 Ps for anyone who needs to just refresh their minds or may not have come across it in that much detail. And then we'll start to have a fishbowl discussion with Alicia, Kath, Cecile, and Ali, and then have time for a wider exploration with you all so that we can learn from you and you can share your experiences and insights and ideas about how to use the 3 Ps in practice at the moment. And we'd like to identify some key learning points for practice as well at the end of the webinar. I hope that sounds all good. And I will now hand over to Charlotte.
Yes, hello, thank you. So just a brief outline, because it's a bit difficult to know how aware you are of the concept and how much in detail you have been able to get to know about it. And I will start by apologizing for my language. I haven't been speaking that much in English for the last 6 months, so I'm struggling a little bit by finding the right words. But so that was a little bit sharing of my private and a little bit of my anxiety to present something in a foreign language, which I feel it is at the moment. But the 3 Ps is about it's a concept that we use a lot in Denmark, and it's very important to be aware of in order to be able to act appropriate to yourself, to your colleagues, and to your children, or the children that you work with. And it as well provides sort of a common knowledge base, or a common value. Sorry?
Go on.
Okay. So a common knowledge base, value sharing base, to avoid sort of inconsistency when we're working. So it gives us some words and some things to talk about what is difficult in the workplace. So in the vertical, we then have the professional P, the personal P, and the private P. And on the horizontal side, we sort of have what informs the 3 Ps in a different way. So the professional stands for what is actually determining our conscious and reflected actions. The personal is much more about empathy and gut feeling, our Haltung, and the context of our interactions, and where the private is much more something that is determined by our former experience, our upbringing, in Denmark, we say that pedagogues are the worst parents because we are not actually able to, what is it called, divide our professional from our private. But it's, yeah, a bit of a joke, I think. So, but on the vertical, then, so we have some kind of basis. We have some knowledge or insight that we use. There are actions that are characterized by different things. We have a different individual approach to collaboration, and we have some needs that we are, whose needs are we taking care of. So if we only work in the professional, we will use our professional competence, our education, whatever that may be. It doesn't have to be pedagogical. It can be any other kind of education we have with us. When we are talking about knowledge, we use theoretical knowledge like laws and policies, research, anything that any kind of knowledge that we have acquired. Our actions will be characterized by using that we analyze things, we use different methods, we evaluate, we have a very specific way of working with things. When we collaborate, we will be multidisciplinary and have the use of a diverse range of people as possible. So we're happy to work with the police. We're happy to work with the social workers, the child protection officer, all the different kind of professionals. And if we're only professional when we work, we will first and foremost take care of other people's needs. This is not about me, this is about my colleagues or about the children or the young people that I work with. If we then work a bit more into the personal as well, you could say that the basis of our of what we do is objectivity, or we will be very factual in the way that we engage with others. We will use processed experiences and self-awareness. We can use a sense of sort of judgment, and use our empathy when we interact and engage with other people. Collaborationally wise, we will be willing and eager to cooperate and make things worse, and we will both look into the needs of other people, but as our own needs as well. So this is basically the two P's that we that we recommend is what we use to be the best professional pedagogue or practitioner that we can be, leader, whatever. Because if we are too much into our private, everything that we do when we look into situations, it will be with subjectivity or emotional. It will be only my view of a certain situation. We will use our own experiences to engage with other people and say things like, my mother slapped me on the hands when I was a child. It didn't do me any harm. And then we don't, we're not that aware that this is not our children, so we can't use our own upbringing in determining how we are working with other people. So so our actions can be very emotive. It can be like a chance, well, maybe we should try and do it this way, rather than finding methods that are usable. And when we collaborate, we will often pursue our own agenda. What is important for us? It's important for us that the children or the young people don't get away with things, or maybe get punished, or get yeah, a lot of discussions with that we're saying it's not okay to have Nutella for breakfast because it's unhealthy with all this sugar. That's not very objective. It's my personal or private opinion. And when we look into needs, we will look first and foremost into our own needs. So what can the workplace do for me rather than what do I have to offer to the workplace? So, so that is basically the idea with the 3 Ps.
Thanks, Charlotte. And I think it shows very clearly why we try to avoid responding to our private P. I think it's important to recognize as well that that private P might still be there, is still somewhere there, and it's about how we deal with that, how we can draw on our colleagues to help keep it out of the professional relationships that we want to nurture. So that is really helpful, I think, and very often people find it really useful to think about where do we draw the line. I think at the best of times that's quite a difficult and tricky thing to do, and we come back to this, it depends. So where we draw the line between what is private and personal can be different for different people we support. It can also be different for different people within a team. So it requires a lot of reflection, both individual reflection, but also reflection within a team about how do we deal with this? How do we support each other and all of this? And I think that was at the best of times quite a challenge, an ongoing kind of dialogue that was needed. I think very much lockdown and the shift to using things like Zoom and more digital media, working from home, all of that has turned a lot of that upside down again. So having to redraw that line about what is professional, personal, and private when I have to work from my own bedroom and talk to people via Zoom is raising similar questions, but also kind of changing some of the dimensions, some of the aspects that I may have control over, or some of the things that I just don't have control over because my kids will be there during lockdown, all the schools were closed, that kind of stuff. So I'm interested in hearing from Alicia, first of all, about what her experience has been of that kind of shift and using the 3 Ps during lockdown in supporting foster carers at Coventry Council.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation, Gabrielle. So I'm Alicia, and I am supervising a social worker based in Coventry City Council fostering team. I am as well qualified social pedagogue, but I gained my qualification in Poland. So whilst working as a supervising social worker, I'm also a panel member. So even into such a challenging pandemic time, we still been able to approve the foster carers into our team. And as well, I am alongside with my colleague Simon Yor, who is taking part today in this webinar. We as well delivering training about the social pedagogy to our colleagues and the foster carers in Coventry. And on the private side, I am mother of toddler, and it's quite interesting. It's a lovely joy, but as you can imagine, working from home and handling parenting tasks in the same time can be interesting challenge at sometimes. But as well, I want to believe opportunity to grow for me as a person and as a mom and as a worker. So today I will be talking a little bit about my experience, but to be honest, to prepare for my reflection over 3 Ps, I looked and read interesting research. It's a report which I would like to share with you, and maybe some of you will find it interesting as well. It's produced by the King's College London and Policy Research Unit in Health and Social Care Workforce, and it's about how different 15 local authorities were managing working with children and the families and the foster carers within this pandemic time. So I will share that with you whilst I will be talking a little bit about my experience. So please bear with me. So this is this document, which maybe some of you will find helpful. Sorry, just we'll leave it at the main page at the moment. So from my perspective, my duty is to supervise a number of foster carers, and I had to really shift my face-to-face visits, which I need to undertake as a statutory requirement, and adapting into kind of virtual world. So, and as well adapting my professionalism into my private life, as actually Gabriel mentioned. It's about creating home office space, but as well knowing how to use the Microsoft Teams, Zoom, WhatsApp application on a daily basis, making sure that in the same time that our lovely foster carers, who not necessarily have to be and have to have this IT literacy skills, they are able as well to connect with us via that platforms. And actually I'm quite impressed how well it's been kind of used by them. It's not as easy, and it's quite sad to see when the birth children would like to have a contact, or we call it family time, with their birth families. But some of the parents unfortunately don't have access to either internet or smartphones, and sometimes it causes a lot of delays and issues with the lack of consistency in the young people's lives. So whilst working from home, of course, we have to be mindful that our colleagues, we may have completely different circumstances. So some of us need to look after elderly, disabled family members, relatives. We've got childcare arrangements to think of. In the past, it was homeschooling, and I always was impressed with my foster carers who could not easily, with some pressure, but handling quite well the fostering task alongside homeschooling, although I believe how much pressure it put on them. In many ways. So some of the consequences of home working, of course, is making maybe fewer visits face to face, and it's enabled us to save some traveling time, which potentially we should use as for the recording purposes and improving our performance in the other task. However, and if some of the colleagues would say that by working from home could they provide them work-life balance, but there is downside of that, the fact that we spend quite a lot of time in front of the screen and jumping from one meeting to the other, and we are missing this time for our reflection, for thinking about what the further action point will be in terms of the next visit, etc. So it's not as easy when you work from home, and when we all experience time when we are so busy in our professional piece, it can be quite well managed, as long as and quite effectively managed, as long as we've got the balance and everything is going according to plan and well in our other piece, so in private and professional. However, the problem arises when one of this piece, private or personal, is not so well. We may have experiencing, some of us, bereavement because of this COVID. We actually were quite sad because we lost our colleague during that pandemic time, and it was quite sad time that we as a team could not take part in a funeral or kind of memorial meeting. So this is kind of the drone side of that. We may have a mental health issues, which unfortunately will impact on our professional being at work. But 3P frameworks really help me to think about the work-life balance in the way like how to create the boundaries to my relationship, especially with my foster care. It's kind of interesting what I want to point out when we deliver training with my colleague Simon to other colleagues from like child protection teams. Perhaps they never ever could really share any private information. Let's say that they've got a child similar age as their child who they think about having Section 47 investigation, etc. Whereas in my way, when I've got kind of a very well established working relationship with my foster carers, and perhaps they've got a toddler who's got tantrums, I can very easily relate to my private experience as being a mother to that child's age issues. And this actually, I want to believe that by sharing my wider private bit with my foster carers, who I know for for a few years. Kind of it's strengthening our relationship because we all sharing common experiencing during this pandemic time. And very often my little one, if I wish or don't, they is coming on my laps and saying hello or goodbye to colleagues. And as long as it's a kind of could be kind of accepted at supervision with my carers who know my kind of that I am that position, it may not be kind of useful when I'm sitting at the panel and approving new carers to our team, or when there's important lack review or other kind of significance. So then I'm working hard to make sure she's not disturbing within that meeting. So this is kind of drawbacks. But then as well, it's quite this three piece helped me to thinking of, yes, professionalism is lovely to be, but as well need to keep the balance between three of them if possible to maintain this mental health and a kind of emotional well-being. So as well in this report, which I'm sharing with you right now, it's about this how to manage this COVID-19, how other 15 local authorities manage the situation, and it's quite interesting research. You can read over there that it's okay not to be okay in many ways, and it's okay not to work all of the hours that we normally would work, because we all trying to adjust to completely different way of doing things, to completely new life. This is new norm, but actually we need to adjust to that. All right, I'm a bit conscious about the time, so I think I will finish at the moment. Sorry, stop sharing the screen. Yes, and if anyone would like to get that, or you can really upload it yourself, I've provided the details now. Thank you.
Robin's already shared a link to the report, so thanks very much. Thanks very much, Alicia. That's really brilliant, and I think you've touched on a lot of points in there, and I think particularly that message about just because we have 3Ps as a framework doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to be fine, but it gives us that opportunity to reflect on what is actually going on for us in the private and how might that affect how we are in the professional encounters as well. And I think the important message that it's okay not to be okay, and to have the support from your team, as well as the support that some of the foster carers might have been able to provide as well. So thanks very much for that. We'll definitely make time to discuss some of those aspects. Kath, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the 3Ps and how you've been using that at community circles?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Kath. I work for a tiny charity called Community Circles. So we partner with a variety of organisations to help people keep connected to whatever matters to them. So building that circle of support around people, connecting people through shared interests, and work with, most of our work in the last few years has been working with older people. And when I think about the 3Ps, I always think about the one-page profiles that we use. So a one-page profile, a snapshot of a person on one sheet of paper. So we think about what people appreciate about somebody, what's important to them, and what does good support look like. So we use those in lots of different ways, and we think about the person who's supported and the snapshot of who they are. We use them for the volunteers that we work with to think about a really good matching process. We use them for ourselves to think about working along with teams and working alongside our colleagues, a way to introduce yourself to the families that we're working with. And I'm going back a long time, years really. But when I first started thinking about one-page profiles and introducing them to teams, everybody pretty consistently went like that. What do you want to know about me for? And I didn't know about the 3Ps then, and I didn't quite have the language to explain what I meant. But the one-page profile, it's that snapshot, but it's always thinking about who's the audience, who are you sharing that information with? So for me, for work, I'll be sharing stuff around my professional bit of me, the things that are important to me in a workplace, how I want to be supported well at work. I'm also really keen to share some personal information, because then we have a better balance between paid staff and the people who are supported. So we want to share a little bit, because the people that we work alongside, we get to know loads of information about them. So I'm more than happy to share about my husband, my kids, my dog, hobbies that I do, a little bit of stuff about that. But it might be the private stuff that I don't share. If I'm sharing things in a work situation, you might not need to know about my morning routine or about my evening routine, because you don't need to know. But if you were providing home care support to me and helping me get ready for the day, then you would need to know about my morning routine and how to support me well. So there is a little bit of a shift. But I remember first introducing them, and there was a real conscious, well, this is work and this is home, and never the two shall meet. And you don't need to know about that bit. But I think if we're thinking in the world of social pedagogy and working alongside people, yeah, it's just that sharing something of yourself to build those relationships. But it is really thinking about the audience, what you're really comfortable in sharing. And we're very keen, the way that we work is thinking about bringing our whole selves to work. How do we have joy at work? Where is our Haltung, and how do we nourish that in the things that we do? Yeah, so it's just, and I think that the lockdown really shifted that. So we've always thought about, what am I good at? What do I love? How can I bring that into work? And obviously in lockdown, all our face-to-face stuff, so we had things happening where we'd connect people around shared interests, to think, knitting groups, book clubs, all that sort of stuff. So we shifted that after a little bit of panic of what do we do now? We shifted that onto Facebook and attempted to recreate our face-to-face groups, but online. So using Zoom, different, videos, different ways of connecting and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, the shift between the professional, the personal and the private felt really apparent during lockdown, because we've been quite familiar with Zoom because we work across the country and we've got work happening in New Zealand. So Zoom felt really familiar. But suddenly we were connecting with a newer audience of people that we were working with who maybe weren't so familiar with Zoom, and we had to share. Yeah, that felt different. So one of our connectors, Megan, suddenly found herself at home with 4 young children. So continuing to do the work, it was doing stuff around cooking with the kids, doing gardening with the kids, sharing that bit. So it was very much being invited into her home and into her family life. So there was definitely a shift between the personal and the private for Megan. We had a conversation online on Facebook around hobbies that we used to do as a child. And then it popped up around tap dancing. So suddenly I'm doing tap dancing videos in my front room. My husband had to do a tap dancing board because I was scratching the tiles. Anyway, but yeah, you sort of really shift of what feels comfortable and what, yeah, where though it all depends, doesn't it? That's the sentence I say a lot in social pedagogy, because it depends on you as a person, on the circumstance, the situation, the relationships. So yeah, being able to be really flexible about what feels comfortable for you, but able to shift that, the professional, the personal and the private. Yeah.
Brilliant. And in the process discovering that you're not the only one who loves tap dancing.
I've just found some new tap shoes upstairs in a bit of a clear out, so I'm very excited.
Brilliant. I can see a social pedagogy tap dance group coming along soon. That is excellent. I think it shows that point about sometimes we can take advantage of those opportunities when we're forced to rethink how do we differentiate between the professional and the personal and the private, and which of our interests that we would not necessarily draw on or would not have to draw on can we actually use on platforms like Zoom. So thanks for sharing that, Kat. That's brilliant. We'll move on then to Cecile. Where is she on my screen? Oh, over there. Cecile.
Hello. And I guess I'm going to share my screen as well. I think very much like what Alicia and Kath have been talking about, I think for me, that's it. It should be shared now. The shift that happened was very much between kind of being able to bring much more, something that I felt should be kept private before lockdown, which was kind of my political engagement and my kind of thinking around how I felt society should be. And actually kind of, because of lockdown, finding ways and finding the connection in how that was very much related to the way I was working with young people. So this is kind of a bit of a representation. I thought about it. So down there is my private P, with me living in a housing co-op in London, and being quite engaged with that and finding that kind of having a different way of looking at buying your houses and the house, you know, like the whole housing market is quite important. And also finding that personally on a human level, it really changes the way that I relate to people, and I am part of the communities where I live with. And this is down there, this is the symbol for the mutual aid groups, which is something that's I'm kind of part of. So that's my private P. And then up at the very top, there is my professional P. And as part of that, while I work as a participation worker for St. Christopher's, I am also doing a very part-time PhD at UCL. And in my PhD, I, through lockdown and before that, I was kind of looking at the work and the data that I'm trying to analyze. And I am trying to see how the rich child, which is a concept that comes from Reggio Emilia, the early years education setting, how the rich child, the concept, the idea of the rich child can be transposed to residential care. And in doing that, what I was finding out is that while the young people themselves that were part of my fieldwork were talking about themselves in very political terms. They were talking, some of them, unaccompanied asylum seeker that were living in a residential home, where, you know, there was something that they didn't agree to, and they would go on a hunger strike to kind of show their disagreement with whatever was happening. Or other people, you know, another one was telling me, oh, you know, in school, my nickname is Gandhi because I go and I do peaceful protests. And yet, the way that was spoken about within the staff in the residential care was very much, you know, they have a lot of anxiety, we need to meet their emotional needs. So I was realizing that there is a kind of, it's not negation, but it's like a real fear of talking about young people in terms of political beings. And I think, so that was happening kind of, you know, professionally, and then privately, I have this kind of quite politically engaged life. And during lockdown, somehow there was a kind of a way of bringing those together. And so in my personal P, the way that I was working with, and I'm taking the idea of two young people, one of them where we would spend a lot of time talking about finding kind of, he was himself identifying triggers for quite traumatic life. And we were talking about that. And as part of that, he would tell me, Cecile, I really want to see how people are good, because I think he was worried about the whole COVID situation. And he needed that to be demonstrated to him because he couldn't have that in his environment. So I started to think, oh, how can I do that? And then I was using example of the mutual aid work I do. And I was telling him that, and then we would, for example, together listen to Clap for Carers. So we would do it together at the same time. And we came to a point where we had a plan to actually sew bags for carers, you know, like the bags that were sent to hospital. Well, he was very keen to do something and to help other people. And actually, the connection there is that if you think of the history of mutual aid, it has quite a political basis. And it was kind of those two things being brought together. And recently that young person told me, you know, I really haven't forgotten that, because it's kind of like, you know, you gave me something, and he had the possibility to show a different part of himself. And I think that connected very much with my professional, you know, the professional, the kind of more academic theoretical thinking that I was doing, where actually him as a political being was being recognized. He wanted to see the goodness of people. And then I have another example of a young person who something similar happened. He comes from Yemen, and he has quite a lot of traumatic experience as well. And I think with him it's very, very much ideological. He rejects very much the kind of the Islamic, you know, extremist Islamic ideology that is understood. Yet I think there is a lot of questions around him around the ideas of justice and how justice is being done. And when he comes to the UK, he had questions around that. And I won't go into the details, but I think I was again trying to see how can I give him an experience where he feels in the society, he can have an impact on his own community. And we were talking about the fact that universal credit has gone up during the pandemic, and that he actually, was telling him, you know, be careful, because it may not be at that level always, because it's just an emergency measure. And we started to talk about that, and he said, no, I really would that. And then I thought that it might be a good idea to actually create a petition to Parliament to actually share like his willingness to, you know, the fact that he wanted the level of universal credit to stay at the same level as they were during the emergency procedure. So we kind of did that. And again, it was, you know, like, it was a very relational thing, because for him, I think what was important is that he would have to go and talk to people about that and build connection to say what he thought. But again, it was very much kind of, whereas before COVID, I had kind of kept very much all this political thing and very much the kind of thinking that I was doing around, you know, Paulo Freire and Marxist ideas. I was actually bringing it together. And I still think there is a lot of work that needs to be done, because you know, there is a boundary between political opinions and how we work. But I think what it really helped was that it helped me to kind of see how it could be done practically. And actually, it's really, really important, I think, that we start, I want to start kind of looking at that and supporting young people to feel. And I think it, in a way, it doesn't have to be political, like party political, but it's kind of finding the connection of how you can have an impact in your community a bit more wider than just like where, you know, like the immediate family. And I think that's very much COVID that kind of pushed me to explore those boundaries. So that's
really fascinating, because I'm just thinking, like, you know, if we say that social pedagogy is very much about taking an ethical stance, then that manifests itself in political action, not necessarily party political, but social political action. And if you think about, you know, young people expressing their views through the climate strikes, through the Extinction Rebellion, through Black Lives Matters, and so on and so forth. I think we cannot talk about empowerment and that being an important goal for our practice if we keep the political completely out of practice. So I think it's a great example of how you can reflect and use the 3 Ps to think about how do you bring your own political perspectives and experiences into practice in a way that's professional and personal without being private. It's not about your needs and trying to convert everybody to your way of thinking and being, but it's about helping young people find a political voice and think through those deeper issues about how do we relate to each other and what's happening in society. So thanks very much for sharing that. I'm very mindful of time, and we still want to hear from Ali before we want to also hear from as many of you as possible. So I'll just neatly hand over to Ali, and you've got
Thanks, Gabriel, and I shall keep it brief. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 Ps in space, not the outer space. We're talking here, don't worry. But thinking about, I've been doing a lot of work around liminal spaces. So some of you who know me here know that that's something of great interest to me. And it's about this time when we're in a place of uncertainty. The old has gone and we're working towards the new. So I've been conscious of this in terms of the pandemic, which has absolutely catapulted us all into this period of uncertainty. And so I've been thinking about the 3 Ps, working with an organisation who work with adults in the community, and the focus is on this deliberate use of relationship to support people in achieving change. And so I've been doing the work before with this organisation, and as life changed for them, that they were doing work from home, Zoom calls, phone calls, weren't able to connect with people physically. So we'd done some training around the 3 Ps before this, and I went back after lockdown, and their key concern was this managing of the 3 Ps, because everything had kind of changed. So I was thinking about the different ways this was challenged in terms of space. So we have the physical space and this lack of it for people in their own work, in their own houses. Their workspace, having to share space with other people in the family, became a real challenge. This emotional space around juggling childcare, attending to, having to attend to others. So there was a really good example of somebody who said she knew she had an appointment with a man who has autism at 12 p.m. She knew she had to make that phone call at 12 p.m. on the dot. Something comes up with a young child, and it was like, what do I do with this? These two are important. Confidential space, that was an issue for individuals to maintain confidentiality of people you're working with, but also they talked about maintaining that confidentiality, so not having these conversations where children could be hearing quite kind of damaging conversations and quite stressful. And then thinking about psychological space, and about how do you differentiate between work life and family and your private life. So having to make sensitive phone calls because of the lack of space in your bedroom to observe this confidentiality with your own family members and that individual. And something one person said I found quite powerful, that I can't leave the problem at home like I used to at work. It sleeps right beside me on the desk. And I just thought that really illustrated that. So this sense that personal space needed to be guarded as private for them to maintain the professional. So things that they used to share in personal had changed. So some of the personal information that had been shared in the past, such as having young children, for example, suddenly felt less comfortable to people when they were meeting from their own homes. And these previous decisions that they thought carefully about in terms of what they share personally, they now had this sense of wanting to bring some of it back to the private. And at the same time, the focus on relational work was really increasing, that people were more lonely, people were struggling with mental health, maybe drugs and domestic violence. So the relationships were more urgent in the work. So this led to us thinking about a reflection of the 3 Ps in relation to space. And I think the pandemic, as we've seen, has massively shifted what it means for people working in these roles that require this meaningful relational engagements. And I think, as Gabriel said, it's about how do we redraw some of these lines, and how do you take back information you've given is a very difficult thing to do. So negotiating how we maintain purposeful, professional, genuine relationships while still addressing your own well-being and the privacy of family life. So some of the things that kind of we talked about and might be helpful for others are thinking about, well, it depends. We've said that a lot. So it's about being able for people to have a different approach within the same team. What is your family situation looking like? Who's the individual that you're working with? It really highlighted the need for more support from peers and managers, maybe to reallocate work that for that person was too difficult at this time. There was a lot of debriefings that people had, so they set up, for example, a Friday debrief to try and kind of to end the week and move into the weekend. So they did some activities around that. Another thing was about walking to work. or the equivalent of this, that you would set off walking and do the 15-minute walk if you could, and then come back and start work, or an activity at the end of the day. So I kind of talk about my personal, as we were shielding as a family in lockdown. We decided to get a cross trainer, and my husband used to walk to work on his cross trainer for 15 minutes before he set off doing his work. But actually, psychologically, it was a really positive thing to do. And then we pinched a bit. I gave them some of the ideas that I've taken from Charlotte and many other people around fika and having well-being breaks. One of the things was that people said, when I'm talking to my colleagues just on the phone, I feel like I'm not working. And it was really important to emphasise the importance of coffee breaks, Zoom calls, that they are work if you're just having a natter. So there you go, I'll finish.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Ali. That was some really fascinating, nice little ideas as well. And I think that bit about how do we navigate those changes within the team, and what can we put in place very practically to kind of help us enjoy a bit more well-being and have time to work things through, and make sure that when we are switching off, that we actually feel like we can afford to leave the professional P behind. That's really important. So we're really curious now for the last 10 to 12 minutes to hear from anyone else who would like to kind of share anything that this resonates with, or any kind of experiences that you may have had about using the 3 Ps. And we'd then like to draw it together by exploring any key learning points. Are there any contributions? Feel free to just raise your hand on screen, or unmute yourselves, or use the reactions to raise your hand virtually if you want. Anyone want to share any experiences of the 3 Ps, or any reflections on what we've heard so far? Simon?
Yes, I just wanted to mention something which I found very interesting, which I came across on the internet, that someone expanded on the 3 Ps into 4 Ps and added public as the 4th P, talking about how we present ourselves on social media, on the internet. And I found it a very clever way to expand on the model, especially when you work with young people, to reflect about what you put on social media, and then talk about, is this how you actually want that other people perceive you, and then maybe even thinking ahead. So this is how you present yourself now. In 5 or 10 years time, this might be still around. Do you think at this time you might still be, you still want people perceive you that way? And I think that leads to some interesting conversations. And I think, I found a very, very useful addition.
Yeah, and absolutely, Simon. And I've come across this by, I think, some carers that we've previously worked with used that as well to kind of help young people kind of think through what is public, what is in the public domain about you. So what might be public to, say, your social workers and your teachers that you might not even be aware of, but also like what happens when you post something on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, and to what extent does some of the stuff we post in confidence, thinking that is private, actually become public, and who can then use it later on. So it's definitely an important dimension to think through with regards to the 3 Ps, I think, in terms of, what is our public persona, and what happens when we share things. And as Ali mentioned, some of those things you just can't take back, and they might be used by people you don't even know yet. So that's a key one to think through. Karen?
There was a couple of things. One that resonated was I work with student social workers, and something that Ali said about that, your personal and private space, and then hearing quite difficult things, challenging things, and then switching off. That's certainly the experience of student social workers on placement, where they had to change from suddenly not being in a team and being at home. That's been a really important thing to be able to support the students with, really working alongside them with that. The other thing I also wanted to mention was Ali and I had done, and I've been involved in doing soundscapes, thinking about use of sound and soundscapes, and thinking about that as a way of reflecting on the personal, professional, and private, and how you can. So it could be snippets of sound that are meaningful for you on a personal level, but actually how they might relate then to the professional. And no, Ali and I found that very helpful to have that kind of discussion about what that brought up for us in terms of you're suddenly in your personal space, but still having to work in in that professional way. But it was a good way of trying to make those connections with it. So an example might have been, and again thinking about, at the moment I no longer have to commute, so using that time to grow vegetables, for example, and then thinking about that, how you then grow those relationships in this new way of being. It kind of helped to make those connections in that way. I won't say any more about it at the moment, but it brought up a lot of interesting discussions. And the final thing I wanted to say was about thinking about how we're all experiencing something, but we then have different levels of experiences within that experience. So it's kind of that, that when we're working alongside the students, we may have similar experiences, but we might also have different things that are going on as well. So it's kind of trying to work that way through that.
Absolutely, I think that's a crucial point, and that it might be, lockdown might have done great things for me in terms of my own 3Ps and the opportunities it might have provided for me to grow vegetables or do things, not have the commute, etc. So I might feel like, hey, actually this has been quite a good experience for lots of people, and I know a few more that are like me, and so I might be completely unaware of the challenges it might have caused someone else, because they have an elderly person to worry about or to care for, or they might have had someone who's just gone into a hospital with COVID or things like that. So those kinds of bits where we are in this together, but we have very, very different experiences, and being mindful of that is really crucial. Great, thanks very much. Would anyone else like to share any examples you might have from your practice around the 3Ps? Robin.
There we go. Yeah, I've been very interested in the private P and how that has developed over the last few months. And I think it's just one of those things to really note that the human condition tends to be self-preserving. So the private P is often what takes over, especially when we're under a great deal of stress and strain, and we're moving further away from our comfort zones, further towards our panic zones. That is when we are more likely to be looking after our own needs, as Charlotta was pointing out, rather than the needs of others. And I think that, coupled with this very blurred line for home working, it's something that as people who support others, either whether they're students or families or elderly people or whatever, we really do need to be aware of what's going on inside of us to be able to ameliorate for that. So that I'm doing some, like, at sometimes 3 times a day reflections just to check on where I'm at. And I think especially when I was working directly with families in my bedroom, sounds very weird, that was really, really important because of the risk that my need would overtake. So yeah, just to be aware of that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really crucial point, Robin. Thanks for highlighting that so well. Great. Any further thoughts? Anyone else who would like to share any further thoughts? I know you're normally at talkative groups. So.
just that one of the things that's been interesting for me in this time is the way in which the professional has come into our private relationships. So it's been a really interesting experience to discover how I need to work with my wife as a colleague now that we're both in the same home office. And it turned out that the private relationship, pretty good. Learning to be good colleagues to each other, really quite challenging and tricky. And holding the boundaries between those things. And I'm curious about that as well, that the seepage both ways. And it's very interesting the shifts that makes in the whole web of relationships that surrounds us and what needs gets met where, and the way that breaks down some of the boundaries, which I think are quite important in the work. So there are issues of time and place, and the merging both ways of relationships, not just the private seeping into the professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also something there about, some of that might be okay for some time. I think the concern and the real renegotiation is ever more necessary when it starts to become the new normal, and when things just kind of continue like this. So I think that's the other dimension where we need to be really mindful of. I think that, Robin, the point you made about the private and the kind of needs that we have, and that kind of self-preservation interest is really crucial as well, because that's I think the key bit is that we all have private needs, and of course we need to survive in order to be able to do our work and to do it well. So it's not to say that private needs aren't important, and it's more a matter of how can we make sure that they don't undermine what we're trying to do professionally. And I think it's lovely to hear so many great examples of how teams have been supportive, how colleagues have been supportive, and presumably leaders in organizations have been supportive as well. So I hope that will continue, and that the 3Ps as a framework will facilitate those kinds of conversations that we need to have to make sure that we are all getting through this stronger and more resilient, and hopefully more appreciative of the relationships we have and how we can grow them. So thanks ever so much for joining us. I hope you'll join us again soon for the next webinar, which is going to be, I want to say the 26th of October. Let me just check. I should have worked that out. Yes, 26th of October, we'll be continuing this series, exploring the relational universe as an important concept, again, given that lockdown has shown how important relationships are. So thanks ever so much for joining us, and I'll see you again soon.